My incredible guest today, Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker, and you probably know him best from the recent documentary My Octopus Teacher, Craig Foster. Welcome to the Art of Excellence. In the words of Aristotle, excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. I am your host, Glenn Zweig. Join me now as I dive into the lives and careers of world-class entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, scientists, thought leaders, and explorers to uncover the ingredients to their extraordinary accomplishments. My guest today is Craig Foster. Craig is one of the world's leading natural history filmmakers and co-founder of the Sea Change Project, a nonprofit to protect marine life and raise awareness of the importance of the kelp forest. He won an Academy Award for Best Documentary for My Octopus Teacher and has created more than 100 films and documentaries. His latest book is titled Amphibious Soul, Finding the Wild in a Tame World. Craig, welcome to the show.
Wonderful to be here and speaking with you, Glenn. Thanks.
Yeah, it sounds like you're literally next door to me. I know you're not. Are you tuning in here from South Africa?
I'm literally right on the tip of Africa, right on the very tip, about an hour south of Cape Town in South Africa.
Wow. And I think you still do these daily swims, do you not?
Correct, yes.
And so you had one this morning?
I'm actually going to go after this. It's been quite a busy day.
I hate to stand between a man and a swim, but just to start there, I know this has been a lifelong passion of yours. When you do these swims, and we're talking about ocean swims here, not a swimming pool, what's the experience for you? Is it a visual thing? Is it a physical, a meditative kind of exercise? Tell me more about what you get out of it.
So there's multiple ways of looking at it. So it depends so much, Glenn, on the conditions of the sea. So I'm looking at first at the swell, and I'm looking at the wind. I'm looking at the light. I'm looking at the currents. And depending on the day, I will design the swim or the dive or the body surf to suit the conditions. The ideal scenario is when we have a northwest wind and the water's very clear. And then I like to do, deep dives through the kelp forest, through underwater caves, no wetsuits, and just free diving. And then what happens is your whole brain chemistry changes. It's an enormous increase in dopamine, up to 250% increase in dopamine, up to 500% increase in adrenaline. And you need to keep very, very calm so the cortisol stays to an absolute minimum. And then I'm tracking animals underwater. So I'm looking for very, very subtle signs underwater to get into the secret lives of these animals. So the combination of this beautiful three-dimensional underwater forest, this, sometimes clear water, cold, it's pretty cold water, and this brain chemistry shift, and then this connection to these animals over years. I did that initial 10 years every day. You feel a tremendous kinship with these animals as you get deeper and deeper into their secret lives. So it's a very transformative experience, but it's also a second home. This is my second home, this underwater world. So I'm very familiar with it, but it's transformative every time because you get such a big shift in the brain chemistry.
So let's talk about this brain chemistry piece. And for those listening that don't know, the reason it's so cold, as you put it, is you don't use a wetsuit. If that's still the case.
Correct.
And yeah, the ocean is can be a bit chilly without a wetsuit. And you seem to really swear by the effects that the cold has. the rejuvenating kinds of benefits, the brain chemistry. But I'd love to hear more about that in terms of not just in the moment you're doing it, but does that carry you throughout the day, throughout the week? How does it change how you feel just going about your work?
So a long immersion, just the brain chemistry side, will carry you for maybe 5 hours. But if you have an incredible encounter with an animal, and I'm very cautious with these animals, as you get closer to knowing them, you realize how sensitive they are. So I'm very cautious of intruding on their lives. But I'm watching them, and sometimes they will come to one and come close and even make physical contact. But it's always on their terms. If you have an extraordinary experience with an animal, that may last for months. And it creates this other brain chemistry kicks in, like oxytocin. So it totally changes your whole mental health, actually, and it changes your immune system. So I used to be quite very prone to chest infections and colds and that. I occasionally will get one still, but few and far between. It's like 500% less. One feels much better. One feels, you know, it just rejuvenates you in these multiple ways. It's not just the cold.
Hmm.
It's the connection with animals, connection with nature. This, you basically you're amphibious. You're in a reverse gravity environment, so you're floating up slowly, if anything. And it's hard to describe. It's like visiting another magnificent planet, but it's a planet that you're very, very familiar with. The sounds are different, and it's just a very powerful, special experience.
Well, I used to be a scuba diver myself,
Hmm.
but we're not talking scuba diving. There's no air supply system or anything like that. It's just you snorkeling and doing dives, right, on your own, because you feel like that gets you closer and more in their natural element. Is that the essence of it?
A lot of animals don't like the sound of scuba.
Hmm.
I enjoy scuba diving, but I don't do it very often. I'll only do it in places that are very deep. And I found the less equipment one has, the closer you get to the environment. You can feel the slightest temperature shift in the water. You can feel the kelp against your skin. You can feel pressure waves in the water produced by the swell or sometimes other creatures, especially you can feel the pressure waves of humans. So it's a very different experience to scuba diving. You're holding your breath. You can get through very narrow places underwater. And yeah, of course, the cold has is very different.
Hmm. And you grew up, I think, not too far from where you are now, and used to do these swims way back in the day. So do you remember how old you were when you first started doing these ocean swims?
So I was about 3 years old when I started diving. I used to go on my dad's back and he used to take me down. And I used to go into the intertidal environment even at an earlier age. I mean, our house was so close to the water that at spring high tide storms, the water used to run around the house. So it was below the high water mark. We had special wooden boards we had to put up on the windows. Otherwise, the waves would lift rocks and just break all the windows. That house would be totally illegal today. But in those
Hmm.
days, so it was literally, we lived in this incredible intertidal ocean environment. And from my first day I was brought home from being born, my parents took me straight into the water. Obviously, I couldn't swim, but they took me in. So it was, from day one, I was connected. And my mother dived, 2 or 3 times a week when she was pregnant. So when in the womb, I heard the sound of the cracker shrimps and the sound of the waves and everything. So it's part of who I am.
Wow. So as you started growing up and becoming more independent and doing these dives on your own, was this a popular pastime with other kids, or was this just a Craig Foster sort of thing?
Um, Diving wasn't overly popular in South Africa, too overly popular at that time, but there were certain people who loved diving. And I dived as a child. I was fascinated by that environment. But I got very serious about it about 12, 13 years ago. And that's when I decided to be in the water every single day and really focus on understanding the ecosystem and developing this underwater tracking. So that was different, a different focus from my childhood.
So at what point, I mean, as you fast forward into your career, of course, you became an incredible filmmaker, a natural world filmmaker. Of course, a lot of people know you through My Octopus Teacher. So there's two parts to this, right? There's the wanting to have one foot in the natural world in your career, and then there's having to have a foot in the filmmaking and the storytelling part of the world. Did these all come together at the same time? Did one precede the other? When did this vision of your future, I guess, emerge?
So what happened was I was interested in filmmaking from about the age of 10.
Hmm.
A friend of mine had a camera and an edit suite, and we used to make little films. And then I tried to make a living when I was young, and it was quite difficult, especially in South Africa, being so far away from the rest of the world. But and then my passion was nature and this interface between humans and the natural world. And at one point, I just said to myself, I'm only going to do projects, film projects that connect to nature. And I'm probably going to lose a lot of work and I don't know how I'm going to survive, but I'm just going to do that. And it was probably the best thing I ever did because it just focused the work. I moved away from commercials, TV commercials, and all that kind of stuff, and just focused on the thing I was passionate about. But the trouble is that I was spending a lot of time in nature, and I thought I knew quite a bit about the natural world. But then we had this amazing opportunity to do this film in the central Kalahari in Botswana with these extraordinary Ngwekwe San master trackers, what some people might know as Bushmen. And they were so connected to the natural world and they were so good at tracking that I realized I was actually outside of nature. It was quite disturbing, very exciting and very disturbing at the same time. So what I had to try and do in the last 12 or 13, 14 years was I was thinking, how could I get inside of nature? And that required actually putting the filmmaking aside and just going every single day into the water and tracking on the shore and trying to get into the lives of these animals. And ironically, ironically, and I was only using the camera as a tool to document and to learn. A small camera that I just had tucked in my pocket and a light. And ironically, that deep immersion and that kind of focus was the origin of and the sort of thing that got me into doing my Octopus Teacher. I was trying
Hmm.
to get away from film.
Yeah.
And of course, as I got deeper in, I got these extraordinary sequences and met this amazing animal that became my teacher and so on. And a lot of other animals. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. On that note, by the way, I love the book. Absolutely
Thank
love the
you.
book. And so this is a quote that I think is my favorite quote of the entire book. And it relates to what you just brought up. So here we go. A few years into my diving routine, I began to need more than immersion. I wanted to understand. I didn't want to just be a tourist, a sightseer appreciating the restorative power and beauty of nature. I wanted to speak its language. I wanted to learn this wild vocabulary, use it every day to read the earth, the water, the animals, to see inside a world beyond my greatest imaginings. I love it. You just knew that there was something more. You wanted, like you said, you felt like an outsider and you wanted to be on the inside, like you saw those tribes people.
Yeah, beautifully read, and thanks for picking that out, Glenn, because that's the key for me of so much of this, and that is what I call the oldest language in the world. And this is this dialogue with the wild, this dialogue with the mother, this incredible mother of mothers that's looked after us from the very beginning and even before our species came. It's just she looks after all living things on this planet, and she always has. And it's that connection to her and that love for her and that reciprocity that was very, very exciting to me. And I think now also guides me in terms of trying to be part of, you know, looking at this massive environmental crisis that we're facing.
Hmm. Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to My Octopus Teacher in a little bit. And again, most people I think know you through that film, that doc. I think, I mean, no surprise that you won the Academy Award for it. But you know, this cute little octopus that you befriended. But way before My Octopus Teacher and that cute little octopus, I think you were 15 years old. You're out snorkeling, and as I understand it, you got dragged down by a giant octopus. You know, we're not talking the smaller, friendlier version, I don't think, that we saw in the movie, but something much more daunting. That must have been pretty terrifying for you.
It happened so fast. Uh, and, you know, this animal was so strong. I mean, I could literally do nothing. And I knew I just had to relax. I mean, there was no, if I fought that animal, I wouldn't be here today. So it only held me for probably 30 seconds to a minute. I'm not sure. And it felt like a long time. And the strange thing was that you'd think you'd be a bit traumatized by that, but I'd had absolutely no negative thoughts or trauma about it. It was just this extraordinary animal, probably a southern giant octopus, maybe you know, quite a lot bigger than me and many times my strength. As I say, it didn't last too long. It was my mistake for getting too close, being too curious. You know, it just got a fright and grabbed me and pulled me into its den and then let me go after a while. And then I was fine.
Well, easier. You know, of course, we got hindsight knowledge here, but that didn't traumatize you, even for a day or two. It didn't make you a little bit nervous to go back in the water.
Strangely enough, not. And then I've had lots of other, you know, experiences in the water, terrifying experiences or near drownings and that. And that did last with those experiences lasted quite a long time with me. But this, for some reason, did not. And I have almost no negative feeling towards it. I'm not sure why.
Okay, I'm going to stay on this theme of wild adventures because you've done over 100 films, and you have come into a lot of, let's just say, precarious situations, a lot of close encounters. So there was a story that you shared about following a crocodile into its underwater cave. It sounded terrifying to me. Can you share that story?
Yeah, that is, I mean, that was very terrifying to me. And I did have, I wouldn't say nightmares, but I had, that carried that fear with me for quite a long time. And this was, you know, I was quite a lot younger, and I had this feeling of desperately wanting to connect with wildness, but I didn't know exactly how. So this great friend of mine, Roger Horrocks, we've been wanting to do a project together for a long time, and he invited me up to the Okavango Delta with my brother and his friend Didier, and we did this film project diving with these massive Nile crocodiles. I mean, these animals are, you know, up to 14, 15 foot long. They drag their prey into these layers, and that's where we were going to try and go. I don't know why we weren't thinking straight, but we took a lot of precautions. We dived with a lot of massive sharks, great whites, all this kind of thing. So we had some idea of how to work with big predators, but a crocodile is completely different to a shark. It's much, much more dangerous. And we had this tiny window in the year where the water was clear, and we managed to do this. And thank goodness nobody was hurt. But I certainly wouldn't do that today. I would not go and do that. The irony of the whole situation was, you know, and this was big expeditions into, you know, remote parts of Africa to do this. And ironically, just on my doorstep when I started immersing in the kelp forest, I got to know these tiny little limpets that you can just go down to the shore and have a look at. And they were far more powerful in connecting me to wildness because I got into their secret lives. I got to know how they graze. I got to know how they move away from the sun. I got to know their world. Whereas a crocodile, you can only do a few dives with them and you don't really you get to know an aspect of them but not you don't understand nature through them, and that's the whole point here, and that's why I put that story in the book, is to show that you don't need these extreme adventures or extreme safaris. It's actually the animal in your backyard that can have the most profound effect on your relationship with nature or with the wild.
Mm. Well, I mean, as long as you bring up sharks, you also did a diving expedition with great white sharks, and I don't think you were in a steel cage, right? With with reinforced rebar there, you were just out there by yourself, and one of them had opened its mouth near you. I mean, I mean, that sounds pretty terrifying too. Was that similar, or how was that different from the croc
No,
experience?
it's completely different.
Okay.
So if you can understand, Glenn, a crocodile, when a crocodile looks at a human, it sees us as a potential meal. And
Mm.
we're the perfect size, we're slow,
Hmm.
and crocodiles still, certainly in Africa, take, you know, many, many people every year, potentially thousands of people. It's hard to know the numbers. When a shark looks at a human being, and I've dived with great white sharks without a cage, I've dived with tiger sharks without a cage, bull sharks, all the so-called dangerous sharks. When a shark looks at a human being and analyzes the human being, it's got what's called a search image, and it searches, and we don't fit into what the shark needs or what the shark sees as prey and as food. And certainly for great whites, our fat content's far too low, etc., etc. So our shape, the way we're swimming, everything doesn't fit into that group. So most of the time, 99.9% of the time, that shark is not that interested in the human and certainly won't see it as food. And so if you can interact reasonably safely with big sharks, depending, of course, on the murkiness of the water and so on, and you'll be okay. And I don't think that's particularly dangerous. But
Mm.
diving with crocodiles is a different story completely.
And crocs isn't the only situation. I mean, I could go on. I think you were once electrocuted by an electric eel or an electric ray. I mean, you've had all sorts of encounters. So I want to use that to talk about managing fear. And you said that managing fear is all about getting to know whatever it is that you're actually afraid of. So maybe go back to that, assuming the croc experience was one of the more harrowing adventures that you had. Tell me about fear and how you think about fear. Is it that you get over the fear or you do what you're going to do despite the fear? I'd love to understand that more.
So I think with fear, it's a big part of, as you say, getting to know what you're fearful of. So the biggest fear is kind of the fear of the unknown. So if you're going to say dive into, a huge dark cave where you can't see properly, what are you scared of? You're scared of the unknown, what might be in there. If you get to know that cave, and there's a magnificent coastal cave that we sometimes go diving here, where we go right into the back, and it's dark and it's deep, and there are sharks in there, but they're actually not a dangerous species. So when we now know that cave,
Hmm.
and I had this incredible experience with my son diving in this cave. As soon as you get to know it and you probe it with your little light and you realize, oh, they just spotted gully sharks, which we know very well and love those sharks very much. It's actually perfectly safe. Of course, you don't go there when it's a big swell because that becomes very dangerous. So it's about knowing the unknown and it's also knowing the conditions. So that is, I think, the same thing psychologically. If you are generally frightened of things that we haven't got control over, we don't know about. So I think good ways of dealing with fear is to slowly get to know those things and then also know the conditions under which it's optimal to confront those fears or stay away from that, those things that are scary.
Hmm. So just to shift gears, you mentioned these native trackers that you observed, that you filmed. Where were you again?
So I was in at that stage when you're talking about it, I was in the central Kalahari of Botswana,
Okay.
which is north of South Africa, sort of in the middle of Southern Africa. And they were people from the Klo and Griqua language groups.
Okay.
We've also worked in Namibia with the Junkosi, but they all make up this collective group of people called the San, and they have this click language. Genetically, they're the oldest people on Earth, so they go back 120,000 years, and then they've got this incredible tradition of tracking.
So you mentioned that beyond tracking visuals and sounds, they're able to actually get into the minds of these creatures. And so that's how they know where they're going when they lose visual reference. I completely believe it. I'm just having some trouble accepting it at face value. Could you help me understand what that means? And is that a skill, or is that just something that's innate? You either have it or you don't. I'm completely fascinated with this idea.
Yeah, great question. So I was pretty much the same as you. Before I saw what they were doing, I didn't believe that that would be possible. Then and this is quite a long time ago, this is maybe at least 25 years ago, we had this extraordinary experience of actually witnessing one of the trackers, and he was following kudu. And this is the Central Kalahari is a flat landscape. You can't see more than about 50 meters because there are thick trees everywhere. And he followed this animal for 4 hours. And I would say 95% of that time that he could not see that animal. And during the last 2 to 3 hours, he was not following the physical tracks of that animal. So we saw the tracks going off in that direction, and he went off in a completely different direction. And he would keep finding that animal in impossible situations, in the deep bush, hidden, completely out of sight, again and again and again. And afterwards, we asked him, well, how did you manage to do this? And he said, after a while with this running and this rhythm and connecting with the animal's tracks, he can feel that animal inside his own body. And then it's as if he can understand where that animal is. And, I would never have believed it if I hadn't seen it. And then many years later, I spoke to an incredible man who, by the name of Nainoa Thompson, who's part of the Polynesian Voyaging Society. And he does this incredible navigation around the world on his traditional sailing canoe. And I spoke to him about this, and he told me about his mentor, an incredible open ocean navigator by the name of Papa Mao. And Papa Mao used to sleep in the hull while they were navigating these massive distances across the Pacific. They'd do 2 or 3 thousand miles of open ocean navigation. They had to hit these tiny islands, like hitting a needle in a haystack. And he used to lie sleeping in the hull at night. And if Nainoa went 1 degree off course, Papa Ma's body you would tell him that he'd gone off course. He'd wake up and shout up to Nainoa. So what is happening is that we have the capacity as humans, much like homing pigeons or, in fact, big cats have, to find their way home. We have this ability, and not everybody, I imagine, but a lot of people have the ability to navigate across impossible open ocean or to find animals. So it's something in us, something that is somewhat mysterious, but that many people can actually do. And subsequently, I've come across another two people who I've seen do the same thing. So it's something that's in us, and maybe it comes out more when you are, very connected to nature, or
Mm.
there's a necessity to do this. And perhaps if we even looked in our, technological world today, you may even find some people with that ability, say if they're tracking in the world of business, who knows? But I have definitely seen this practiced, and it's very hard to find any way that they could have cheated, put it that way.
It's amazing. Okay, My Octopus Teacher. Let's uh, let's dive into this one. My sense is the documentary moved people in a very profound way. More than, oh, what a good movie. I mean, hitting people in their gut, hitting people in a very visceral way. It certainly did for me. It's a simple but such a beautiful story about a human's connection with nature, about our interconnectedness with all living creatures. So, as a starting point here, are you able to appreciate the impact that that movie had? Beyond just winning an Academy Award for it, of course.
So, I mean, one of the things that I think is that in today's world, people are desperate in many ways to have a feeling of belonging. And if I can just go back a little bit, so many people who lived before the Industrial Revolution, even before the Agricultural Revolution, they had relationships with thousands of different animals and plants. And imagine now all that getting severed, and we've got a relationship with maybe a few family members, if we're lucky, a cell phone, a computer. The wild psyche, that part of our psyche that's been used to for thousands and thousands of years of being connected to all these wild kin, all these wild animals and wild plants, is longing for that. We can remember what that's like. Now, if you see something or a film where a little bit of those connections are being restored, there's this tremendous sense of remembering and wanting to belong to this incredible wild family that we've known for, since the beginning of time, since the beginning of our species. So I think that it's amazing how much, underneath the tame exterior, there's this, in every single human being, is this incredible wild person that's quite desperate to come out and express himself, herself. I think that's, in a way, what people were feeling. The sense of belonging that is, I feel, in many ways, quite lacking in our culture.
Hmm. Well, just to talk about the octopus itself, I don't think before watching the film I had any clue just how magnificent this creature is. It has this innate ability to transform itself, mimic surrounding colors and shapes and textures so it can camouflage itself, which I think is its primary defense and survival mechanism. And what intrigued me is in the book, you talk about its intelligence. And you say that octopi intelligence is up there with dogs and cats. So I'm trying to separate what's intelligence versus instinct. So is there an example or two that you have that help illustrate its intelligence?
Sure, absolutely. So, what immediately comes to mind is the octopus, has almost, the female does look after the eggs very, very well. But as soon as those animals are born, or very soon after, the female octopus dies. So they're completely on their own. But they're born with these incredible instincts, and they use those in many ways. But they're also this incredible learning machine. So my teacher, for instance, would predate or have over 50 different prey that she would hunt. Okay. And those range from crabs to lobsters to a lot of mollusks. And these animals are super difficult to get hold of. And many of the mollusks are completely glued to the rock. I mean, you know, with all the force of my hand, I would never be able to get them off. So she has to learn how to get them off. Now she has to drill through that shell in a very specific spot in order to get to the adductor muscle so that that animal releases and she can get it off the rock. So she has to figure out where that exact spot is.
Hmm.
And sometimes she'll make one or two mistakes and then she will get the right spot. And then she will remember exactly how to, she'll never make that mistake again. And she learns that with 50 different prey species. How to hunt, like lobsters are different to crabs, and how you have to do. And she'll make mistakes in the beginning, and then you'll just see very quickly she will learn exactly how to do it. And she'll strategize. So she'll even sometimes use me as a foil to get between me and the lobster.
Hmm.
That's how clever she is. And then she'll work out exactly how to pounce based upon a few failures. So this animal is like this incredible learning machine, and she remembers how to get back to her den. She doesn't go the same route. She knows exactly where it is so she can navigate. She remembers different parts of the kelp forest. She knows where all the different animals are. I mean, it's just remarkable, the intelligence, and it builds up. So she becomes more and more and more clever.
I mean, you were with that octopus every day for months. Was everything you just described, was this already in the prevailing literature? Are these new findings that we didn't know about the octopus? Was this validating, or was this coming up with sort of a new understanding, a new framework for the mind of this creature?
So some of it's in the literature, and there was many things I found that I could not find in the literature. And remember, octopuses have been studied a lot, but they haven't been studied much in the kelp forest environment. For instance, she was using the canopy of the kelp in interesting ways to hide in, and also to actually come out of the canopy and chase crabs and all sorts of things. So I think there was quite a lot of things that were discovered in this process that were new to science.
Hmm. Remember, we talked about the trackers and this ability to get into their minds. And there was one point where this octopus that you were observing every day didn't return to its usual spot. I think you got too close to it, and she swam away and didn't go back to her usual place where you would go to every day. So you had to somehow, and I don't know how you did this, but you had to somehow track her down, which is really hard to do. I mean, I used to scuba dive. I mean, the sands are continually shifting with the ebbs and flows of the currents, et cetera. Everything sort of looks the same, but you did it. So I was sort of wondering, do you feel that you were somehow able to get into the mind of this octopus, or was it just about a visual kind of tracking exercise that you did?
I'm not able to do that incredible high level intuitive tracking that I've seen in the
Mm.
Kalahari. What I was able to do is I knew that environment so well. So I was there were a few places that I thought she may go, and there was just a lot of looking. And then also I'd learned to do the underwater tracking and find the little signs. So if an octopus has been around, I can just look at an environment, and I think it's my subconscious knows that an octopus has been there because my eyes are seeing all these little signs, and you
Mm.
can just get the feeling. So that's a different thing. I have had one or two strange experiences where I've been looking for certain animals. And remember, in the film, it's all about the octopus, but I'm actually tracking many different animals at the same time and getting
Oh.
to know them. And she's teaching me about all her prey, all her predators, all her cleanup crews. It's not, if you know the octopus, you have to know at least 100 other animals,
Hmm.
because if you don't, you have to know the prey, you have to know the predators to know her. So it's never just the one animal. So I have had strange experiences where I found things that were not visible to me, but I think it could have been my subconscious, because your subconscious is picking up almost everything, but your conscious mind is only seeing certain things. And if you ask questions into nature, sometimes you get these seemingly magical answers, but I think it's a lot of information is sitting in the subconscious mind. And as you ask, it sort of bubbles to the surface and your conscious mind catches onto it.
Hmm.
So it's hard to, these are mysterious things we're talking about. You know, it's hard to pin them down, but certainly indigenous people have known these ways for a long time. And some of their abilities don't fit neatly into our understanding of the scientific world. Although now with quantum science, we're starting to broaden our perspective.
Well, back to the earlier quote, and you're having watched these trackers, perhaps with some envy because they were on the inside. You felt like an outsider. So it seems, at least watching the movie, that through this experience, you finally became an insider. So it seems. How do you feel?
I could definitely feel that massive difference of stepping inside of nature. And it was, profound and incredibly transformative and a huge relief. And that came with being able to speak this wild language. And then we're talking about these amazing things of spirit tracking, all this stuff, but most trackers, this is far and few between these kind of more spiritual experiences. It's the daily understanding of these very subtle tracks and being able to speak this incredible language and seeing what's happened in the night. When I go into the kelp forest, I'm walking on the shore. I can see all these incredible stories that have happened in the night, even in the day before. And in
Mm.
some of the tracks that are left on the stones, I can look back hundreds and thousands of years even. It's incredibly powerful feeling to have this dialogue with the wild. It's almost more powerful in many ways than a spiritual experience. It's a true knowing of this wild heritage that we hold, this language that has been spoken from the very beginning, that has, for its words, the signs and the tracks and the spoor and the marks that are in the wild, left by animals, by plants, by minerals.
Mm.
And when you know this original language, and I've put an enormous effort into learning it, and you've got thousands of these marks in your and tracks in your mind, it changes your whole feeling of your relationship with Earth. You feel like you belong. You feel like you are not separate. You feel like your body is completely part of nature, which of course it is. All our bodies are completely part of nature. And there's not this separation. And that's a very, very comforting feeling.
Mm. You got pretty choked up when the octopus died, and as if you had lost a pet that you had for many years. You must have gotten really emotionally attached to it over the course of that film. Is that the first time that you ever had that kind of emotional response to something in the ocean?
I got very close to her, and she's different from a pet. I've had one or two incredible pets, dogs, and most especially cats that I was very close to. But because she's wild, it's all on her own terms. And she's teaching me a lot. Every week, I'm learning a hell of a lot, and I'm changing because of her. So it's not like a pet. I feel subservient to her in many ways. She is teaching me so much. I don't know how much she's getting out of it. I am just so grateful to her and so in awe of her. So it's a stronger bond in a way than with a pet that, it's all on on your terms. You enclose it, you feed it, and so on. This is a wild creature that's allowing me into her space and teaching me and allowing me to just tag along beside her while she hunts because she totally trusts me. So it's very different. And you're so grateful to that animal and you feel so close to her because of this experience that it is, closer to the time, you feel very emotional about it.
Well, I think this was the first time you would switch roles from being behind the camera to being in front of it. I, I mean, you were the subject as much as the octopus, and you became pretty famous overnight. If you don't mind my bringing this up, you'd sort of mentioned that having that kind of success, having that people knowing who you are, that it had an impact to some degree on your mental health. I was hoping you might be able to share some of that.
Sure, it's no problem. I mean, I write about it in the book. I must say it took me by surprise. It was it was far more terrifying than diving with crocodiles or sharks or anything like that. Suddenly, I mean, we thought, very few people would be interested in this film. And suddenly, Netflix and you're into this enormous audience and you feel, you're in hundreds of millions of people's dining rooms, in their TV rooms. You're in there and you're getting an enormous amount of attention, which you're not used to. And it was extremely difficult to deal with. I had no mechanisms, I had no experience with this kind of thing. And it kind of manifested in not being able to sleep for months on end. And that really messes up your mental health.
Mm.
Um, and I think it also comes from, a lot of these amazing indigenous people I've worked with. They are incredibly wary of elevating any person in their society because they know how difficult it is and they know the problems that come with that. And I think we're not, there's nothing in our evolution, in our past, that gives us the tools to deal with this kind of thing. And I felt that so strongly. But of course, on the other hand, the very positive side of all of this, once I'd got through that very difficult time and figured out how to sleep again, you become quite resilient. And also, then you can use that attention to talk about the thing that you're most passionate about. And that is, for me, the biodiversity of this planet, this mother of mothers, this incredible natural system that I've had the privilege of being able to have this dialogue with.
Well, one more question on this topic. Even before My Octopus Teacher, before you became the subject, before you flip sides on the camera, you had sort of alluded to how being so passionate, being so consumed with filmmaking, there's a double-edged sword to it. That these projects that filled you with all of this intense energy and the stamina, that it took would also completely drain you for a period of time. And I don't mean for a day or two, weeks, even months. So is that just you put so much of yourself into these projects that you just sort of completely deplete yourself, all of your reserves? Is that the essence of it?
Yes, and I think a lot of people, creative people or people in business who are driven will probably understand this well. Especially when I was younger, I used to be absolutely focused. So the film I was doing or whatever I was doing was like the absolute focus. I just dreamt, slept, ate the project and would work 18, 20-hour days for months on end and just completely immerse myself in that. And then, of course, what you don't realize is it's just eating away at your reserves. And we'd spend, enormous hours in the edit suites, front of computers, that kind of thing. And after every project, there'd be this massive dip. I think a lot of filmmakers and people will know the cycle of kind of depletion and then trying to revive oneself and then the next project. So somehow through this nature immersion, this deep nature immersion, and through also the extreme hardship of not being able to sleep for many months, I suddenly clicked in my stupid head that this wasn't a particularly healthy cycle to be in.
Hmm.
And now what I try and do is, spend more time with my family, my wife, my son, more quiet time in nature. I still work pretty hard, but I've tried to have a balance and I don't deplete that reserve. That is, I use the tools that I've learned to keep rejuvenating myself. And a lot of that is about spending time in the wild because it has this amazing way of topping up your energy reserves. And
Mm.
I think it's got to do with your nervous system. If you are, keep pushing your nervous system, it eventually will fail. And what happens if you spend this quality time in nature doing these things I do, it calms the nervous system in a beautiful way so that it doesn't deplete the reserves.
You also mentioned how having a sense of purpose in life is critical to having the energy, the reserves to accomplish anything you want. What's your sense of purpose? Because I'm guessing it's probably evolved over the years.
That's a really great question, Glenn. I mean, I think what's interesting is that I could get slightly philosophical here. If you really think about why we're here on this planet and the 13.8 billion years of evolution and our tiny little few seconds in of our lives, you can make a very good case for a completely purposeless existence. Would you agree with me?
Oh, of course.
But I think it's quite critical to create, in many ways, what my great friend Roger Horrocks, who I've done a lot of these films with, calls the healing fiction. And that is a good sense of purpose. And it's quite good to have the sense of purpose and then right in the back of your mind have this sense of purposelessness so that there's a balance. So you also don't become absolutely fanatical and get into that same cycle I'm talking about.
Hmm.
But I've found my greatest passion and my purpose is to learn this wild language that we've been talking about, this oldest language, and use that as a voice to communicate to the world that there is one thing that is more precious than anything else on this planet. And that thing is called biological diversity or biodiversity. And that's what I mean by that is all the animals, plants, algae, bacteria, and all the ecosystems and all their interactions. And why I say it's the most precious thing to every single human on this planet, much more precious than gold or diamonds or money, is because it's our life support system. Somehow that message has been forgotten. This is the thing that's keeping all of us breathing, all of us eating, keeping the climate in balance, keeping the temperature right. All these tiny little animals and bacteria and everything keep us alive. So this biological diversity is the mother of mothers. This is this extraordinary thing that scientists know extremely well, especially biologists, that literally keeping us alive. And indigenous people knew about this, know about it today. Ironically, 80% of the biodiversity on this planet is protected by indigenous people, even though they make up only 5% of our population.
Mm.
And it's absolutely critical that we keep this biodiversity healthy. And at the moment, we are not doing that. We're doing the opposite. We are destroying the biodiversity. If we keep going at this trajectory, we will almost certainly wipe out our entire species. And then the earth will regenerate and create new species and so on, like it's done over the millennia. But somehow this message is not getting through that we need to protect the mother. And that's what my passion is, and that's what I found great purpose in. So that's a long-winded answer, but hope you don't mind.
No, no, please. Well, you co-founded an organization called Sea Change Project. So, what role is that organization specifically playing within raising awareness or driving actual biodiversity or rejuvenation?
So we've had this now for over a decade, this amazing NGO called Sea Change Project, as you said, and it's made up of 10 people who are absolutely dedicated to what I'm telling you about. For the first 5 years, most of the people worked for free. That was just their absolute passion. And everybody is dedicated to what I'm talking about. And we've got, marine biologists, we've got storytellers, we've got filmmakers, and they are working closely. I'm working closely with them to get this message across. For instance, now this week we are working with the G20 in Brazil, and we've created a whole short film and presentation that talks about how important biodiversity is. And just to give you some example, what we've done is created this amazing animation where we've put the mother nature in the world's boardroom. We've put her in the boardroom, and you have the people sitting around the boardroom, this giant mother nature sitting there. So we work on science projects, we work on biodiversity projects, we work on projects with local people, with indigenous people, all in a collaboration to try and bring this story of our mother to the fore. Because when you do a survey and you ask people in most parts of the world, well, what are the main problems we're facing? Only 1 or 2% of people are talking about climate change or the environment or this biological diversity.
It's a very noteworthy organization. Thank you for sharing all that. Here's how I like to end the show. Craig, the podcast you're on, of course, is called The Art of Excellence. And I always like to flip that over to my guests to ask them how they define that word excellence. When you think of it, what does it mean to you?
I think excellence in many ways is rising to the potential that we all have. And from my perspective, and from this book that I've just written, which is called Amphibious Soul, what I've looked at is the two aspects of the human psyche. And I've looked at the tame part of our psyche, which loves the tame world and the technology and all the wonderful things, a beautiful cup of coffee and a warm bed and everything, which I think is great and I'm not against. And then, of course, the wild part of our psyche, this enormous memory that goes back to the beginning of time. And I find there's a huge imbalance between the wild and the tame. The tame has taken over, and we need to find the balance between the wild and the tame. So for me, excellence would be to tap into the wild part of us that's in every person and reconnect with that, because I think that's so critical. Once we reestablish a relationship with the wild, with our excellent selves, that is going to be the major motivation to change our entire system to working in reciprocity with nature, as opposed to destroying our own life support system, which we're currently doing.
It's powerful. The book, Amphibious Soul, Finding the Wild in a Tame World. I love the book, like I said. I will likely read it again. I think I have seen My Octopus Teacher now 3 times or 4 times. I'll probably watch that one again as well. And I know there's another 100 films behind that I haven't even had a chance to look at yet.
It's so wonderful to talk to you, Glenn. So easy to talk to you and wonderful questions. Can I just add one thing?
Please, please.
The book has been designed. So if you go, and maybe I would like to know if you've even noticed this yourself, because most people miss it.
Okay.
In the middle of the book, there's a tracking journal, and at the last picture is of an octopus that's stolen my camera and it's filming me. And there is a little QR code there, and if you click on that code, it takes you to 27 short films that are all connected to stories in the book. So while you're reading the book, you can actually watch short films of 3 to 5 minutes showing you exactly what's going on. You can be diving with the crocodiles, you can be tracking with the octopus, you can be in the Kalahari. And so it's an immersive experience that you can even do while you're reading the book or after you've read the book. So and that's free to everybody. And it's an experiment that I don't think's been done before.
I wish I knew, and I completely missed it. I will go back and relook at those. You do a great job of bringing these stories to life just with the narrative. I don't know if you did that, if you're just a great writer as much as you're a filmmaker, if you had help, but it was a very visual book, if you will, in terms of my understanding what you're going through. But I will go back and look at these videos. Thank you for sharing that. You are an incredible storyteller. You are an incredible advocate for Mother Nature, for wildlife. Craig, thank you, sir. Really, really enjoyed it.
Wonderful talking to you. Bless you. Bless you, Glenn.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, here's my ask of you. First, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Second, tell a friend. Better yet, share it with all your friends and contacts on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Honestly, wherever you hang out online is fine with me. Please leave me a review if you could on iTunes or Spotify or both. The reviews really do help. And finally, try to find one takeaway from this episode that you can apply to your own life. Commit to trying something, anything. As the saying goes, no harm in trying. I leave you with this one question. How do you define the word excellence?